It was a crisp autumn evening in Portland, Oregon, on September 6, 2006, when Susan pulled her car into the driveway of her modest blue Cape Cod home in the quiet Montevilla neighborhood. Prior to coming home, she wrapped up her shift and stopped at the Perfect Look Hair Salon on East Burnside Street. While flipping through an Oprah magazine, a poem leaped out at her, one she had read out loud to the stylist. It stated, "I will not die an unlived life. I will not live in fear." It lingered in her mind as she drove home, arriving there around 6:30 p.m. She was a dedicated ER nurse at Providence Portland Medical Center, where she'd spent nearly 3 decades handling everything from violent patients to split-second life-saving decisions. Standing 5'4", she was built by years of stressful shifts and lingering knee injuries, and she was no stranger to chaos. The hospital even required years of self-defense training, techniques to disarm attackers, escape holds, to stay alive in the ER. This was her everyday life and job. As she entered the home, kicking off her Birkenstocks, she disarmed the house alarm with the familiar code, 1210. She entered her kitchen and dropped her purse as she glanced over at her microwave. She read a note that was lying there. She found it quite odd, but brushed it off as she headed towards her bedroom. Her full name is Susan Walters. At 51 years old, she was the poster child for resilience. Her path in life was that of a quiet determination, marked by childhood upheaval. As an adult, she worked hard to create a stable life. She was born in 1955. She grew up in a fractured family. Her father was an Air Force cook and her mother was a homemaker. They separated when she was in 2nd grade, and the split sent her shuttling back and forth between states: Colorado, Arizona, California, Nevada, teaching her early on to adapt and endure to constant change. The constant moving left Susan resilient but craving stability. By the early 1980s, she'd settled into Portland, becoming a licensed practical nurse. She continued her education and went on, becoming a registered nurse, and she thrived in a high-stakes emergency room environment. Her personality shined through. She had a boisterous laugh that filled rooms, an outgoing personality that drew people in, and a love for comedy shows where she'd snag front row seats to unwind. She felt uneasy as she entered her bedroom, and she spotted a moving shadow that appeared on the wall. And that's when the shadow struck her. A stranger lunged towards her from behind the door. He was definitely taller than her. He must have weighed 200 pounds. He was wearing yellow rubber gloves, and in his grip he had a red and black hammer. He swung hard, cracking her left temple. Blood trickled down her face. She crowded in, preventing his swing. "Who are you? What do you want?" she screamed. There was no response, just another lunge. She slammed her body into his. He shoved her against the bedroom wall. He said, "You're strong." The words flipped a switch in her mind. This isn't a robber. He's here to kill me. The fight spilled into the hallway. It was a brutal 15 to 20-minute battle. Susan wrestled the hammer free, swinging the claw into his skull 3 or 4 times, drawing blood that sprayed and pooled on the floor. He snatched it back, punching her in the face and splitting her lip. She fell, staring up as he raised the weapon again. She thought, "I'm gonna die today." "No, I'm not." She yanked him down with her, biting savagely into his arm, his hip, the thigh, marking him for whatever came next. She rifled through his pocket for an ID. She was ready to toss it under furniture for police to find later. Wedged on their sides, lying in the blood, Susan threw her leg over him, climbed on top, and locked her arm around his neck in a chokehold. Tell me who sent you here and I'll call an ambulance." He growled but said nothing. She squeezed harder. His face turned red, then purple, then a sickly blue. He went limp. Grabbing the hammer for protection, Susan fled barefoot to the neighbor's home, who dialed 911. "The intruder was in the bedroom with a hammer," they reported. "She put a chokehold on him. She hit him in the head several times and she thinks he's dead." Police arrived to a gruesome scene. The man's body was in the hallway. He was lying in a pool of blood, mostly from the hammer wounds. The autopsy later revealed his name. He was Edward Dalton Haffey. He was 59 years old. He was a Vietnam veteran with a near-lethal dose of cocaine in his system, amplifying the chaos. In the basement of Susan's home, they found his backpack. He had Hershey's syrup, $200 cash, diabetes pills, and a daybook. There was a work pay stub and an envelope with a cell number. His wallet confirmed his identity, and his record showed a dark past. He spent 9 years in prison for conspiracy to commit aggravated murder in the 1991 killing of his ex-girlfriend. Her body was dumped along the Umpqua River and left to decompose. He was released from prison in 2003. He then moved to Portland. Susan was wounded and shaken. She recounted the nightmare to the detectives, but her ER poise was cracking under the weight of the situation. This appeared to be a botched burglary job gone wrong. Just a random intruder high on drugs caught in the act. Investigators dug deeper and the threads unraveled. Haffey's pay stub linked him to the fantasy adult video store. Witnesses emerged. One recalled driving Haffey to meet a bald man in an Applebee's parking lot days before. Another was a former cellmate. He reported Haffey trying to recruit him for an insurance scam involving killing a woman for $5,000, but the man refused. Employment records show Haffey had been hired in 2004 by the video store's janitorial supervisor. Financial trails hinted at desperation, and the cell phone number on the envelope, well, it traced back to someone close to Susan. The pieces snapped into place. The supervisor at the fantasy adult video store was Mike Kuhnhausen. Oh, Susan knew him, and let me tell you how she knew him. In 1988, when Susan was 33, she was feeling the weight of being single. She was lonely. Her mother and her close friend encouraged her to take out a personal ad in the Willamette weekly newspaper. It was a Portland-based newspaper. Her mom and her friend paid for it because they wanted to see her happy. It read, "Someone different, single white female, 33, overweight but not over life, seeks single male who wants more out of a relationship than just slender." This ad was carefully crafted to express Susan's personality and her desires. She described herself as a single white female who was upfront about her physical appearance, emphasizing her vitality and openness to a meaningful connection beyond superficial attributes. And the ad received attention. "Hi, different. My name is Mike. I'm a 39-year-old divorced white male. I enjoy most things in nature, from wandering in the ape caves at Mount St. Helens to walking on the beach at sunset." This sparked her interest. They talked for over 100 hours on the phone before meeting. Susan marking that first call in her kitten-themed daybook with a smiley face. Their initial date was pure charm, feeding ducks at Crystal Springs Garden, tossing peanuts to squirrels, and by the end of the year, they were married in Reno, Nevada. Mike was born in 1948 and adopted as a newborn in Portland. He painted a picture of a rugged past, elaborating on his combat experience in Vietnam. He was previously married, he was a chain smoker, and he guzzled Diet Cokes. Their union started sweet, but over 17 years, cracks started to form. Mike saw life as a crap sandwich you just keep biting into. He had controlling tendencies which emerged, questioning Susan's every outing, scrutinizing over her expenses, even small ones, like a $2 iced tea. They had no children, which suited Susan, but the constant disconnect wore her down. In September of 2005, she finally asked him to leave. "I care about you, but I don't want to live with you anymore." Mike moved in with his father, and they stayed on somewhat civil terms, and he dropped by the house occasionally. The house was paid off and valued at around $300,000. It was hers now. It was a symbol of her independence. By 2006, Susan's life had steadied. She poured herself into work. Her patient's gratitude was a daily reward. Sue found the note by the microwave. It was from Mike. She never changed the locks or the code at their home, so Mike had access to it. It was their anniversary date, December 10th. The code was 1210. The note read, "Sue, haven't been sleeping, had to get away. Went to the beach." That was odd but not alarming. His life was unraveling. He'd lost his job weeks earlier. Mike was a janitorial supervisor at the Fantasy Adult Video Store. Yep. When Mike left Susan's home that day, he drove his gold Dodge Neon to the coast and checked into the Lincoln City Inn that afternoon. It was for his alibi. When Mike left the note, he also let Hoffy into the house while Susan was at work. Then he fled to the coast in his gold Dodge. Mike stood to inherit the $300,000 house if Susan died. The notebook that was in Hoffy's backpack had an entry in it for September 4th saying, "Call Mike." Mike hired Hoffy for $50,000 to murder Susan and stage it as a burglary gone wrong. The day after the attack, Mike even bought a .357 Magnum revolver at a pawn shop, perhaps for protection or something darker. On September 13th, police cornered Mike in a medical center parking garage, where he was attempting to check himself in, claiming, "I have nothing to live for anymore." A suicide note left at his father's home read, "All I ever wanted was to be loved, and every time I had it, I effed it up." He was arrested for conspiracy to commit murder. Mike initially denied knowing Hoffy. "Just because I know the guy doesn't mean I did anything." But confronted with the evidence, he crumbled. Mike said, "You're not going to believe my side of the story. My side of the story is off the wall." Susan filed for divorce the next day, changing her name back to Walters for a fresh start. On August 30th, 2007, Mike pleaded guilty to soliciting her murder and was sentenced to 10 years. She sued him for $1 million in emotional distress, not for the cash, but to ensure that he couldn't fund another attempt. Portland police awarded her for her sheer determination in surviving. I call this a miracle. Oh, by the way, records show Mike was never a combat Vietnam soldier. He worked a switchboard in Vietnam. The ordeal doesn't end here. Susan, once bubbly and bold, grappled with profound PTSD. It manifested swiftly after the incident, blending with anxiety and depression that haunted her daily life. She described feeling like a broken plate glued back together. Susan was hypervigilant. She sat with her back to walls in restaurants. She varied her routes home and circled blocks if she sensed there was someone tailing her. Paranoia gripped her. One sunny day, she spotted a jogger sprinting towards her car at a stoplight. It triggered a surge of panic. Her heart raced until he passed by. She relocated to a new home on a cul-de-sac. Security became an obsession. She laid gravel around the property to hear approaching footsteps. She installed alarms and planned for video cameras, and devised an escape plan to vanish at a moment's notice if danger reemerged. She even practiced shooting at a local range, preparing for the worst. The act of killing Haffey weighed heavily on her conscience, despite knowing it was self-preservation. "I didn't choose his death. I chose my life," she stated. Recounting the story often brought uncontrollable sobs, though she noted that crying sometimes provided relief. An emotional moment of closure came in 2010 when Haffey's aunt wrote her. She stated, "You did what you were forced to do." At 51 during the attack, she continued her 30-year nursing career at Providence Portland Medical Center until December 2014. As Mike's 2014 prison release loomed, her anxiety peaked. She feared his claim of terminal prostate cancer might make him desperate. With not a lot to lose, Susan likened her ordeal to a life sentence for picking a bad husband. His prison letters never admitted guilt. Instead, he portrayed himself as the victim. She utilized victim services and petitioned the parole board to restrict Mike from entering her county. Just 92 days before Mike's freedom date from prison, on Friday, June 13th, 2014, Mike died of prostate cancer. This allowed Susan to exhale after years of vigilance. Susan went on to advocate for domestic violence survivors and victims' rights, speaking publicly. "If you can't run and you can't hide, you have to fight. You don't know that you won't survive." Thanks for watching. Have a great week.